Mom stared at me across the kitchen island like I had tracked mud onto her clean tile and said, "You'll never be as good as your sister." I set down the casserole dish I'd brought for Sunday dinner, felt my throat go dry, and watched her turn away as if the conversation were settled. By the end of the month, I would stand in front of the same family, the same neighbors who followed the local news like it was weather, and say something that would change the way my mother said my name for the rest of her life. It was the first Sunday after Labor Day, the kind when school supply displays get replaced by tailgate banners, and the local station kept a running ticker about a lane closure on I-270. My dad had the Guardians game low on the living room TV, meatloaf was warming in the oven, and my sister Lindsay was telling anyone who would listen about the split level she and Ethan had scored 3 miles west, like it fell from the sky and landed on their down payment. I'd come straight from my apartment in Hilliard with my hair still damp from a rushed shower and a faint lemon smell on my hands from the dish soap. I put my phone face down on the counter, slid my casserole into the corner near Mom's potato salad, and tried to guess which version of her I'd get today. "You could have texted you were running late," she said without looking at me. "Traffic on Cemetery Road," I said, keeping my voice steady. Lindsay gave me that thin smile she learned in high school, the one that made teachers think she was listening. "We were just talking about housewarming gifts," she said, as if I'd asked. "Ethan thinks a sectional, but Mom says a dining set is more practical." Mom wiped a dry dish for the third time. "A dining set shows you built a home, not just a crash pad," she said. Then she looked at me, and I felt it coming, the line she used when she wanted me smaller. "Don't worry, Rachel," she said. "There's no rush. You don't jump into things you can't handle. You'll never be as good as your sister at hosting anyway." I took one breath, then another, past the stew of smells and the baseball announcer counting strikes. "I'm not trying to be Lindsay," I said, surprised at how even my voice sounded. "I'm trying to be me." She put down the dish and wiped her hands. "Then stop bringing dishes like you're competing," she said, and the meatloaf timer went off like a bell at the end of a round. I rinsed my hands in water that ran just shy of hot and stared at my reflection in the dark window, the neighbor's flag moving slow across the street. I didn't say I'd spent Saturday morning at the neighborhood yard sale on the second weekend of the month helping Mrs. Alvarez, who needed to cover a surprise car repair. I didn't say I'd been promoted to assistant manager at the credit union last week and celebrated alone with a container of lo mein and a movie. I didn't say any of it. I dried my hands on a towel with little pumpkins and asked when dinner would be ready. Lindsay's voice rolled through the dining room when the food finally hit the table. "So, we close on the first Monday next month," she said, filling her plate like she needed proof for the internet. "Ethan's uncle is handling the mortgage, so it's basically done. We're just waiting on a couple of papers." Mom nodded as if she'd invented mortgages. "Your sister knows how to move. She doesn't sit around second-guessing like some people," she said, and she didn't have to look at me for the plate to feel heavy. Dad cleared his throat and asked if anyone wanted sweet tea, the way men in our family put a towel on a spill and pretend the floor is dry. Lindsay turned to me with that friendly tone people use when they're leading you into a hole. "Hey, Rach, maybe you can help me with my credit union paperwork this week," she said. "We're moving some things around, and I want to make sure it looks clean." The words were easy, too easy. I chewed a bite of meatloaf and knew there was something in the works I hadn't asked to be part of. "I can't advise you at work," I said carefully. "But you can explain things to family at dinner," Mom said, "unless you think you're too important now." I felt my shoulders draw up tight. "I have training Tuesday morning," I said, keeping my voice level. "We can talk after that." "Perfect," Lindsay said, grinning like we'd solved peace. Dad reached for the salt. "Guardians are up by 1, he said, but nobody was listening. The next hint came Monday afternoon, the kind that doesn't look like a hint until it sets the whole month on fire. A woman from the county auditor's office came by the branch with a stack of deposit slips and while she waited, she told me she'd seen Mom and Lindsay at the recorders last Thursday. Funny thing, she said, tapping her pen on the counter. Love seeing folks getting their paperwork in order before a move. So many wait until the last minute, then blame us. I kept my expression neutral the way training teaches. Busy time of year, I said. She laughed and told me about a picnic her union was hosting. I smiled and counted cash for the man at window 2 and felt my stomach line up like dominoes. After the lunch rush, I stepped outside for air. The heat hung stubborn for September, and I could smell cut grass from the lot down the road. I called Mom. You were at the recorders? I asked, aiming for casual. She exhaled like I was a bill collector. Your sister's closing soon, she said. We needed to make sure everything with the house was tidy in case they used the equity for cash flow before closing. What house? I asked, even though I knew. This one, she said, like it was obvious. We put a small line on it to help them through month 1. It's nothing. I leaned against the brick and felt my pulse in my ears. Whose name is on that line? I asked. Yours too, she said, as if she were telling me the weather. We used that power of attorney I keep on file for you. You signed it when you started college and never changed it. You're welcome. I pressed my fingertips into the rough mortar. I never gave you permission to use it, I said. And you can't pull equity in my name. She laughed, a short huff. Don't be dramatic. Families help families. Your sister doesn't have time to fix her credit from that silly store card she forgot to pay 2 years ago. We're smoothing it for her. If you were a good sister, you'd offer before I had to ask. The sun on my face felt hot and mean. You had to forge my initials, I said, my mouth dry. You're acting like a cop, she said. Stop making problems. We've already signed. My breath came fast. Then we have a problem, I said. She hung up. By Tuesday after the elementary school PTA night where I helped stack chairs twice a month, I had a list of questions in my head and not enough answers. I left the gym as the custodian turned off one row of lights and asked if he'd seen my keys on the stage. He hadn't. I walked out to the parking lot anyway, the air cooler now with a hint of grill smoke from a block over. My phone buzzed. Lindsay. Hey, she sang, can you swing by Mom's? I have the loan packet. It's super basic, you'll breeze through it. I thought about all the times she breezed through while someone else caught the wind. I can come by for 20 minutes, I said. I'm tired. Long day. We're all tired, she said, her voice losing the sugar. That's life. I drove the 2 miles to my parents' cul-de-sac and parked behind Ethan's truck. From the street, I could see the glow of the living room, Dad's outline in his recliner, the baseball highlights looping on silent. Mom opened the door before I knocked. Shoes off, she said, as if there'd been dirt on my soles since 1998. Lindsay spread papers across the dining table like a dealer laying cards. This is the Helic, she said. They said a co-borrower makes it clean. Just put your initials here and sign the back page. She tapped a line where my name sat next to hers. My stomach flipped, and I realized there wasn't a clean version of this scenario that didn't end with my credit chained to hers. No, I said, and the room went quiet except for the baseball crowd cheering on Dad's TV. No, Mom repeated, like she'd never heard the word used at this table. I'm not signing anything, I said, and I felt my pulse steady as the words landed. And if you used a power of attorney to sign for me last week, you're going to rescind it tomorrow. Mom's lips went white. Grow up, she said. You're not as generous as your sister. She would sign for you in a heartbeat. Lindsay put a hand on her hip. You're embarrassing yourself, she said. You know I'll pay it off in a month. I looked at the estimated draw box and saw $10,000 in tidy print and a note about debt consolidation, and I thought about her forgotten store card, the engagement party next weekend, the set of new tires Ethan needed, the backsplash she'd posted about on social media. This isn't a month, I said quietly. This is a pattern. Mom laughed without humor. There it is, she said, the martyr's speech. You never were as good as your sister at understanding family. Dad cleared his throat, stared at the TV, and didn't say a word. My hands were steady when I slid the packet back to Lindsay, and the hum in my ears was my own heartbeat telling me something had finally switched. The escalation began like these things always do, small, then loud. Wednesday morning, I went to the branch early and sat with Carla, our compliance officer, a woman who can smell nonsense through copy paper. I described the situation as a hypothetical with similarities to real life. She listened with a patient face and asked 3 questions in a fixed order. Was a durable power of attorney executed? Is it filed anywhere official? Do you believe your initials or signature were copied or affixed without your consent? I answered, and she pursed her lips. If even part of that is accurate, she said, you need to revoke the power of attorney in writing, notify the lender in writing, and freeze any account you think could be misused. Also, document everything. Dates, times, who said what. Keep it factual. I swallowed and felt my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth. What if the lender already approved a draw, I asked. Then they'll either reverse it, she said, or they'll fight you. And if they fight you, you'll need a lawyer. I nodded and pictured my pay stub. A lawyer was an amount of money I didn't have. She must have read it on my face. You can do a lot with letters and sunlight, she said, shifting in her chair. Sunlight means making sure everyone who matters sees exactly what they're doing. You don't need to be unkind. You just need to be clear. I thanked her, typed up a single-page revocation using a template from our training library, and took an early lunch to the county recorder's office. The clerk at the window had a baseball mug on his desk and a little fan pointed at his face. I need to file this, I said, keeping my tone friendly. He read the page, glanced at my license, and said, "Good you came now. If there was a recent filing off that old POA, this will at least put a flag on the account." He stamped the page and slid the receipt to me. "Watch your mail," he said. "If anything hits your name, it'll come quick." I walked out into the noon light, the courthouse steps warm under my flats, and felt something settle. It wasn't peace. It was a checklist. Thursday brought obstacles I didn't pencil in. Mom called twice before my first break and left a message the length of a podcast. "How dare you accuse us," she said. "You've always been dramatic. Your sister just needed a hand." Lindsay sent a text with a screenshot of an empty checking account and a caption, "Happy now." Ethan's number popped up next. "You mess with my fiancé's credit again," he said when I answered, his voice low, "and I'll come down to that bank and make a scene." "Don't," I said, and my palms went sweaty. "I'm at work." "Then fix it," he said. "Or we call the police and say you've been harassing us." The word police hit the middle of my chest like a thrown stapler. I hung up, typed a short email to Carla documenting the call, and then forced myself to eat a granola bar at my desk. By afternoon, I had a certified letter ready for the lender, a copy to the branch manager, and an envelope addressed to my parents reminding them their use of the old document was revoked, with a single sentence about future use being unauthorized. It wasn't revenge. It was a seatbelt before a crash. On Friday before homecoming, the local news ran a feel-good piece on the PDA's fall carnival next weekend, and I caught myself thinking how the weather might be perfect for a pie walk. I stopped at my mailbox after work and found 2 envelopes with the bank's logo. The first was thin. Notice of attempted helic draw declined. The reason line read, "Signature mismatch, pending verification." The second was thicker. Notice of change in authorized party, power of attorney revoked. I leaned against my townhouse's warm siding and breathed like I'd been holding my lungs since Tuesday. I wanted to run upstairs and put water on for pasta and pretend the world was a series of envelopes I could open in order. I also wanted to drive to my parents' house and drop the letters on the table like a town crier. Instead, I took a photo of both for my records, ate a bowl of cereal standing up, and fell asleep on the couch with the postgame on mute. Saturday morning, I woke early and walked to the neighborhood yard sale with the same tote bag I use every year. I told myself I needed a quiet morning, but it was really an excuse to dodge my family until I knew how to stand upright in front of them. Mrs. Alvarez from 2 doors down was sorting mugs by size on a folding table, and the air smelled like hot asphalt and cinnamon from someone's candle stash. "You look like someone who slept in her clothes," she said, half teasing. I laughed once. "I did," I said, and I told her a trimmed version of the week. She listened, then opened a cardboard box and pulled out a stack of old binders. "We're terrible at money stories in families," she said. "We make it about love to avoid making it about math. If you want to talk to somebody who knows how to keep feelings out of forms, the library runs a free legal clinic on the second Tuesday night. My cousin volunteers." I nodded too fast and blinked back, heat in my eyes. "I'm not trying to sue anyone," I said. "I just want my name back." She put a business card in my hand anyway and adjusted a price tag on a toaster. "You can want 2 things," she said. "Your name back and your dignity intact." A kid rang a toy bell 3 tables over, and I let the sound bring my shoulders down a notch. By the second week, the dynamic had shifted from subtle to loud enough that the neighbors noticed. Mom posted a long message about the importance of supporting family without making it transactional, and 3 of her bridge friends wrote comments with heart emojis. Lindsay shared a story about women tearing down other women when we should lift each other up, which felt like a comedian reading my diary on stage. I didn't respond. I polished the water spots off my bathroom mirror, took a load to Goodwill, and made a line in my notebook labeled facts, followed by dates, actions, and copies of everything I could print without risking my job. On Monday, the first part of the hidden truth showed up like junk mail. The county sent notice that a corrective affidavit had been filed to clarify signatures on last week's Hellick attempt. Attached was a pixelated page with my initials on 3 lines I had never seen until that minute, and a notary stamp from a woman I recognized from Mom's walking group. I sat at my kitchen table and listened to the dishwasher hum as if it had anything to do with me. My chest felt tight. I texted Mrs. Alvarez and asked for the library clinic schedule. I didn't want to call. I called. The clinic room at the branch library smelled like old paper and coffee, and the volunteer attorney handed me a form that asked more questions than my last physical. "I'm not suing my mother," I said when he looked up, and he nodded like he'd heard the sentence 100 times. "You're protecting yourself," he said. "That's different." I told him everything, careful with each detail. He asked about the notary. He asked if I had copies of texts. He asked if anyone in my family had a pattern of smoothing things by using someone else's name. "My grandmother left bonds in both our names," I said finally, the words dragging out like rope. "Mine disappeared before I turned 18. Mom said they got cashed early to cover a house repair. 2 years later, Lindsay had a used car with a bow on it." He made a small note. "I'm not a therapist," he said, "but things tend to echo." He outlined options with the careful voice of someone who had sat with 100 daughters in this exact chair. "You can file an affidavit of forgery with the recorder. You can send a cease and desist for any use of your name. You can ask the notary's commission to review the event if you believe she acknowledged a signature without you present. None of that is emotional. It's process." I nodded and felt something in my spine line up. "Will it fix my family?" I asked, even though I knew his answer. He folded his hands. "It might fix your part of it," he said. "And that might be the only part you can fix." When I left, the sky over the parking lot had that bleached look it gets before a fall storm, and the air smelled like wet leaves even though the trees hadn't turned yet. Act 2 got worse before it got interesting. When Mom realized the bank had blocked the draw, she called the branch and asked for me by full name, like a teacher to the intercom. "You are making a spectacle," she said when I picked up. "If you hated your sister this much, you could have said it to her face." I looked at my screen and saw the recording notice and felt a small comfort that my memory would be backed up by a few kilobytes somewhere. "I don't hate anyone," I said. "I hate this situation." She exhaled into the phone, then let the words I knew were coming fall in a tone that sounded like victory. "You'll never be as good as your sister at being part of a family," she said, and I finally heard it for what it was, a rule she wrote so she didn't have to change. That night my HOA sent a notice about my mailbox paint chipping and a fine if I didn't fix it by the last Thursday before payday. I laughed in the empty kitchen. The world was sending me bills from every direction, and my paychecks had numbers with limits. I made a list. Buy paint Saturday, file the affidavit Friday, show up to the PDA carnival Sunday, keep receipts, keep calm. The first crack in the lie happened the following Tuesday, the one after PDA, at the county office where the clerk with the baseball mug had started to recognize me. I brought the affidavit and my driver's license and waited in a line with 3 men in work boots and a woman carrying a folder labeled Dad's Will. When it was my turn, the clerk scanned my papers, typed for a long minute, and then tilted his head. "You want to see something?" he asked. "I can't print it, but I can show you on the screen." He turned the monitor slightly and pulled up an image of a deed transfer from 8 months earlier. "Here," he said, pointing to the legal description of my parents' house. "Quitclaim deed from both owners to a family LLC. Members listed as Patricia and Lindsay. My dad's name was missing. The sale price box had a single dollar amount that didn't match market value by a mile." "Is that normal?" I asked, and my voice sounded like it was coming from the hallway. "People move property for estate reasons," he said carefully. "But you asked about that old POA. This deed doesn't show you. What it does show is timing." He tapped the date with a chewed pen cap. "Same week your grandmother's trust filed its final notice." He leaned back and laced his fingers behind his head. "Could be nothing. Could be a story." I stared at the screen and saw the month I was living inside. I took notes I didn't know how to hold with one hand and said thank you twice while he told me where to file the form. I walked out into a sky that had gone gray, the kind that sits heavy over Columbus in September, and I stood there with the copy of my affidavit and a receipt that proved I wasn't imagining it. I could feel my heart banging a beat that was too fast for standing still. I texted Dad, "Are you home tonight?" He responded with, "Game at 7, and a thumbs-up emoji, which is how men like him have learned to dodge sentences. I drove over anyway. The front door was unlocked because that's how my parents have done it since we moved there when I was 10. The TV had pre-game chatter, and the house smelled like the onion burgers Dad makes when Mom's at bridge." He looked up surprised. "Hey, kiddo," he said, and he clicked the volume down. I sat on the couch, put the papers on the coffee table, and waited for the part where adults look at each other like equals. "Why is the house in a company with Mom and Lindsay?" I asked. He blinked slowly like a man coming up from the deep end. "Your mother said it was smart," he said. "Saves on taxes. Keeps things simple for when we're gone." I kept my hands folded so he wouldn't see them shake. "You weren't listed," I said. He stared at the papers like they were a language he used to know. "Your mother handled it," he said, and I felt the edge of the couch against my calves. "Dad," I said, and I heard the word like it used to sound when I brought home math tests. "Did Grandma leave anything meant for me that never arrived?" He swallowed and looked toward the kitchen like the answer might be hanging near the calendar. "Your grandmother loved you," he said. "She wanted to help everyone. Your mother said the bonds were used for the roof. That was the same year Lindsay needed a car to get to her internship." He looked back at me and shrugged with his eyes. "You were off at college," he said. "You didn't need wheels." The room felt warmer than it was. "I needed fairness," I said, and he looked down at his hands. I left before Mom came home. I walked out past the mailbox I'd painted myself in high school and stood on the sidewalk where we'd set up lemonade stands with paper cups for a quarter. The neighbor across the street waved from his porch swing. I waved back like nothing in the fabric had torn. In my car, I let my head rest on the steering wheel and stayed there until a car crawled past and I remembered where I was. At home, I boiled pasta, stirred a jar of sauce with tired circles, and ate out of a bowl with my feet on the coffee table. The post-game show flickered about a blown save. I turned it off. I opened a fresh page in my notebook and wrote, in slow block letters, "I am done shrinking." Then I wrote the names of every person who'd be in the room later when I finally stood up, because rooms have shapes and people have patterns, and if I had to learn the lines after all these years, I was going to learn them with the facts lit up clear enough for anyone to read. The next morning, I woke before my alarm with my jaw tight and my tongue dry, and by the time I got to the branch, the sun had that white glare that makes you squint in the parking lot even when the air still feels like summer. Carla motioned me into her office before I could put my lunch in the fridge, and she held up a printout with my name redacted like I was a witness in a documentary. "The lender faxed verification questions," she said, tapping the page with her pen. "They want to know if you were present when the notary acknowledged your initials." I could feel heat climb my neck. "I wasn't," I said, and the word felt like a coin dropping. She nodded once. "Then I need you to put that in writing again, short and clean, and send it to both the lender and their compliance box. No speeches, no adjectives. Just the facts." I sat down at the spare desk near the copier, typed 2 paragraphs, printed them with my hands shaking just enough to make the paper rattle, and handed them back to her. "Good," she said, smoothing the pages. "One more thing. The title company handling your sister's purchase is on Broad Street. They're going to see this. Prepare for your family to stop pretending this is a misunderstanding." By late afternoon, I had a voicemail from Lindsay that started sweet and ended sharp. "Hey, if you're trying to show off for your little bank friends, congrats," she said, her voice bouncing off the inside of my car as I listened before pulling out. "The title people called Ethan at work. They're reviewing the file now, which is weird, because it was fine until your drama. You always find a way to be the center of things you don't even have." She breathed like she'd run up a flight of stairs. "If this delays closing, you're paying for the mover's deposit. That's on you." I sat there with the seatbelt locked across my chest and the afternoon baseball talk show babbling from the neighbor's garage. My palms went damp. I hit save on the message because you don't throw away evidence just because it hurts your ears. The allies showed up where most decent surprises live in this town, at the service counter with a coffee that had cooled to room temperature. Thursday around 2, a man in a navy polo with a name tag that said Eric waited while I finished with a customer, then leaned in with careful shoulders like he didn't want a scene. "I'm with Buckeye Title," he said, keeping his voice low. "Your name came up." I straightened before I could help it. "I'm not sure how much I can talk about," I said, thinking of the code of conduct binder in my bottom drawer. He lifted a hand. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said. "I'm here to tell you something." We stopped the closing until we can reconcile the documents connected to that equity line. We also opened an internal review on a notary we've used before. I'm not calling anyone a liar, but dates and signatures travel together, and this batch looks like it took a different route. He looked tired in the way people do when they've had to tell the truth to angry faces for a living. "You will probably get blamed," he said flat, like weather. "Underwriters don't like surprises, and families don't like underwriters." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "Thank you for telling me," I said. He nodded, slid a business card across the counter, and added, "If you get threats, keep them. If anyone calls your employer, let your manager handle it. Don't meet alone." I don't need to say this, but I'm saying it anyway. His coffee had gone cold. He tossed it on his way out. The next day, last Friday before payday, the underwriter sent a short email to my personal account because I had included it on the letter in case mail got slow. "Thank you for your statement," it said. "We are placing a fraud alert on the file and not proceeding until verification is complete." 10 words and a period, and my hands started to tremble on the keyboard. 5 minutes later, my phone lit up with Mom's name and the kind of ringtone you regret choosing. I answered, because sometimes you stand in the yard when the storm starts just to see if you can. "You think you're clever," she said, skipping hello. "Eric called me. Do you feel big? Do you feel like someone finally noticed the middle child who couldn't keep up?" My throat tasted metallic. "I told the truth," I said. "That's all." She made a sound like a cough and a laugh had gotten stuck. "You'll be alone when this is over," she said. "Your sister will have a home and a husband and a family. You'll have receipts." I pressed 2 fingers into my temple. "I've been alone before," I said, and the silence on the other end felt like static. Then she spoke again, softer, worse. "Your grandmother wrote a note the week before she died," she said. "She said Lindsay should manage the house when we're old because she has a head for it." You know, she was right. I could feel my stomach flip like I'd taken a turn too fast on Route 62. "I'd like to see that note," I said. "You can't," she said. It wasn't formal. Then she hung up, and I stood in my small kitchen and stared at the toaster as if it had answers. Saturday, I bought a $7 can of black paint and fixed the mailbox because the HOA doesn't take emotions into account when they mail fines. The afternoon was warm enough that the paint turned tacky within minutes, and as I waited I could smell someone grilling down the block, a mix of charcoal and sweet marinade. My neighbor, a quiet guy who wears the same ball cap year-round, walked over and nodded at the mailbox post. "Looks sharp," he said. "Thanks," I said. "Can't fight City Hall." He squinted at me. "Everything else good?" He asked in that way Ohioans use when they've read your mother's Facebook but want to pretend they didn't. "It's a long month," I said. He tapped the brim of his cap and said, "Aren't they all?" and then wandered back to his yard. On the 3rd Wednesday, the notary called me from a number I didn't recognize. "It's Heather," she said, and her voice already had apology in it. "Patricia told me you were busy that day and said she had your verbal okay, and I should just witness the file so they wouldn't lose the rate lock." My fingers went cold even though the apartment was warm. "You stamped a document with my name when I wasn't there," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I never said yes." She exhaled a long breath. "I know," she said. "I know. It wasn't right. I've been getting calls from the commission and I'm writing a statement to correct it. I'm going to say I didn't witness you. I'll take the hit." I didn't say anything for 3 long seconds because the type of anger that makes you quiet is the kind that can last a lifetime. Then I said, "Thank you," because I was raised to say it when someone finally did the bare minimum. "I'm sorry," she added, and I believed she was, but that didn't put my name back in my mouth or my initials back in my hand. When we hung up, I sat down on the edge of my bed and stared at the closet door like I could focus my way into a different family. By the time the 4th week clipped into place, Ethan's uncle had stepped away from the mortgage. The title company had issued a hold pending verification, and Lindsay had shifted her strategy from calls to a slow drip of public comments that made people choose teams. "Some people can't stand to watch others be happy," she posted under a photo of her in a kitchen showroom, and 5 of her friends from high school chimed in with hearts and "you deserve it." I didn't respond. I made myself pasta with olive oil and salt because that's what I do when everything else tastes like cardboard. Dad sent one text that read, "Let's keep the peace," and I stared at it until the screen dimmed on its own. The cashier at the grocery store asked if I wanted to donate $1 to a local food drive, and I did because I needed to do something that made sense. The plan came together in pieces the way furniture does when you finally lay out all the screws in a straight line. I printed the notary's statement the second it hit my email, slid it into a clear folder with the lender's decline notice, the recorder's receipt, and a clean list of dates. I added a very short note at the front addressed to 4 people only: Dad, the title officer, Ethan's new lender contact if he found one, and my mother. No explanations, no extra words. Just the timeline. Then I printed 3 photos Lindsay had posted over the past year of her little wins, each one tagged with a date, and I put them beneath the timeline because people will argue a block of text, but they rarely argue a clock. I packed the folder in my tote and put the tote by my front door because I am a person who forgets things when she is upset, and I was going to need to remember everything. An hour later, Mom called to announce that the engagement party was still on for the last Saturday of the month at the community center by the park. "We are not canceling because of your tantrum," she said. "Caterer is paid, hall is paid, people expect a good night." I pictured the room with the wood-paneled walls where my cousin had his graduation party and where the Lions Club hosted spaghetti dinners in winter. I could hear the clink of chafing dishes and the scrape of folding chairs and the low hum of neighbors doing math about everyone's business. "I'll be there," I said, and she laughed like I'd told a joke. "You will not make a scene," she said. "You will smile and you will bring a gift and you will sit with your father and talk about baseball." I didn't answer right away. "I'll be there," I repeated, and she hung up before I could say one more word. If there was a loss to make it count, it came the next day when my branch manager called me into his office with his careful face on. "Your mother left a voicemail at the main number," he said, steepling his fingers the way bosses do when they'd rather be anywhere else. "Said you're harassing her and obstructing your sister's mortgage." My stomach dropped like an elevator at the wrong floor. "She's trying to pull me into silence through work," I said, quieter than I meant to. He nodded. "I listened twice," he said. "I also looked at your documentation and talked to Carla. You're fine. But I'm putting a note in the file so we have a record in case it escalates." He rubbed his chin and added, "Take lunch outside today. Get some air." I said thank you because that's the rule, but what I wanted to do was sleep for 3 days. I ate a turkey sandwich on a bench by the retention pond behind the strip mall and watched geese walk like they owned the path. A kid rode by on a scooter and yelled, "They're big ducks," and I nodded like he'd handed me a truth. On the last Thursday before payday, I drove to my parents' street to drop off the folders because I wanted to control at least one stage of this mess. The light had that early fall slant that makes the whole block look like an old photograph. I parked across from the house because I didn't want to use their driveway and walked up with my tote on my shoulder and my heart beating too hard for a short walk. Mom opened the door before I knocked like she'd been standing there counting. "If you're here to apologize, it's late," she said, and the smell of lemon cleaner drifted out like a warning. "I'm here to leave some papers," I said, careful with each word. Dad stood 2 steps behind her, his face blank with concern, and for a second I saw him carry me across the threshold the week we moved in, and then I was 33 again, and my mouth felt like cotton. I handed the folder to him, not her, and said, "These are facts, not opinions." Mom reached to take it, and I kept my hand where it was until Dad took it himself. She noticed. Her eyes narrowed. "You've been coached," she said. "You think you're the lawyer in a commercial." I didn't answer. "See you Saturday," I said, and I turned and walked back down the steps with my spine straighter than felt natural. At home that night, I wrapped a small cutting board in brown paper and tied it with kitchen twine because I refused to show up empty-handed even if it made me look soft. I tucked a card inside that said, "Build something solid," because I can be mean if I try, but I am better when I don't. I set out the dress I wear to work when I need people to take me seriously, navy, simple, not 1 inch of fuss, and I laid my tote next to it with the folder inside because part of me still worried I'd forget the one thing I couldn't forget. Then I sat on the couch with the Guardians game low, the announcer's voice a steady metronome against the background of my small life, and I made a list in my head of who would be at the party and where they liked to stand in that room. Mom would float near the food like a host guarding the buffet. Lindsay would plant herself near the gift table for the photos. Ethan would orbit her with that smile he puts on for groups. Dad would take a chair near the TV on the wall if they turned it on for the late game. The women from Mom's walking group would cluster under the exit sign. The neighbors would pick the back corner by the stacked chairs. I could see all of it like a map. I slept badly, dreamed of signing my name and watching the letters slide off the page, and woke before the alarm with a taste like pennies in my mouth. Saturday morning was clear and a little cool, the kind of start that makes people say, "Fall's really here," even though the leaves are still green. I ate toast standing up, checked the folder again because fear makes me fussy, and drove across town on streets I could navigate with my eyes shut. The community center's parking lot was already half full when I pulled in. Men carried in cases of soda. Women wrestled plastic tablecloths into place. A teenager in a too-big polo set up a speaker with a Bluetooth symbol blinking like a heartbeat. I carried the gift in one hand and the tote in the other, and felt the familiar flutter in my chest that comes when I walk into rooms where my mother has told her version first. Lindsay caught sight of me from across the room and lifted her chin. "You came," she said, and for 1 second I saw us in matching pajamas on Christmas morning, then it was gone. "I brought you something for your kitchen," I said, holding up the wrapped board. "How thoughtful," she said in a tone that made the word weigh 10 pounds. Mom swept in behind her like a second wave. "Keep your remarks short," she said without pretending to whisper. "People are here to celebrate, not hear about your feelings." I looked at Dad, who was adjusting the TV volume even though it was off, and felt my throat go tight. "I'll be brief," I said, and my voice sounded like it belonged to a different woman with my same shoes. When the last tray was set, the last balloon tied to the door handle, and the first round of small talk wore thin, the room fell into that moment between eating and the toasts where an MC is supposed to appear. My mother lifted her plastic cup and tapped it with a spoon to gather attention. "Thank you for coming," she said, her face shining with the effort of being seen doing a good job. "Family is everything, and tonight we show our support with love and joy." She smiled at me for a second, the kind of smile that says you are being watched, then turned to Lindsay. To my eldest, who has always known how to lead. People lifted their cups. I felt my heart thud once, twice. Then I lifted my own hand. "I'd like to say something too," I said, and the room shifted a few degrees. Mom stiffened like someone had moved her chair. "Keep it pleasant," she said. Lindsay rolled her eyes, Ethan smirked, and Dad looked at the floor. I stepped forward with my tote on my shoulder, and my breath steadied in a way I recognize from the moments at work when I have to tell a customer there's a hold on their check. My voice, when it came out, was even. "I'll be quick," I said. "Just a handful of dates and what they mean." I could feel every eye in the room skate over me when I said I'd be quick, and I reached into my tote and pulled out the clear folder that had lived on my kitchen table all week. The plastic cool against my fingers, even in that crowded hall with the chafing dishes throwing off heat and the balloon strings sagging a little from the lights. I stood near the sheet cake so I wouldn't have to hold anything else, and I kept my voice even as I said the first date like I was reading a box score. Thursday, the 14th, County Recorder's Office. A line of credit attempt using an old power of attorney you had on file for me, one I revoked the following Wednesday. The bank declined the draw because the initials didn't match. I watched heads turn toward Mom, then toward Lindsay, then back to me, and I felt the room settle into a kind of quiet I recognize from the branch lobby when bad news is about to be handed over the counter. I placed the decline notice on the gift table next to a slow cooker someone had wrapped in silver paper and said, "Here is the letter with the reason code. Here is the stamped revocation from the county. And here is the notary's statement from yesterday saying she didn't actually witness my initials." Mom made a small sound in her throat like a seat squeak and tried to wave, the way she does when a fly won't leave a potato salad bowl alone, but I kept going because stopping would have turned me into the exact person she thinks I am. 8 months back, same week Grandma's trust was closed. A quitclaim deed put this house into a family LLC with 2 members listed. I'm not in the company. Dad isn't either. I'm not calling anyone a thief. I'm saying the timing matters, and I'm saying my name is mine. I let the sentence hang there for a second, quiet but not soft, and then I walked the folder to Dad and put it in his hands because I needed him to feel the weight of paper that had felt light to everyone else. These are facts, I said, and I turned back to the room and decided to risk one more line, the one that changed the shape of my month. Going forward, no one is allowed to use my name or my old power of attorney to tidy a file, to smooth an application, or to make a number prettier. If you try, I will correct it on the record. I wish everyone well. I also wish to be left out of your paperwork. Mom stepped forward like she might snatch the folder out of Dad's hands, but he held it against his chest and took a small step back toward the TV on the wall. And that movement did something to the energy in the room that I didn't expect because it was the first time in a long time he stood in a spot that wasn't assigned by my mother's lists. Lindsay let out a laugh that didn't land, the kind that sounds like a cough wearing a dress, and she said, "You're jealous," with the force of someone trying on a sentence she'd practiced in her car, and she added, "You just can't stand seeing me happy." And there were nods from the corner where her high school friends had posted up near the stacked chairs, but there were also people looking at the dates on the pages I'd set out and doing the math all by themselves without me asking them to. Ethan took one step toward me like he had a speech, then thought better of it when the title officer from Buckeye cleared his throat and said into the space, "We're reviewing the file," and the quiet after reviewing was fuller than any toast that could have followed. Mom forced a smile and clapped her hands once, the plastic cup popping under the pressure, and she said, "Back to celebrating," with a tone that sounded like a whistle at the end of practice, and someone turned the Bluetooth speaker up one notch too high so it hissed. And for a moment I felt a wave of heat rise from my chest like I'd run a mile in a sweater, and then I felt fine, steady, the way you do when you finally put down a box you've been pretending was light. I stayed long enough to watch Lindsay open the gift for me because I didn't want anyone saying I'd thrown shade and run, and when she pulled the brown paper off the cutting board and read the card. Her face did that thing it does when she reads a text she didn't like and tries to smile anyway, and I said, "I hope your kitchen brings you good things," and she shrugged and turned to whisper to her friend. And I let my eyes rest for a second on the line of foil pans stuffed with baked ziti and green beans and barbecue meatballs, and then I took my tote back onto my shoulder and walked across the floor to Dad because I wanted to speak to him inside a bubble before Mom could slide in. He looked up with that tired kindness he keeps in his pocket for hard days and said, "Your grandmother would have liked your lists," and the sentence landed on my spine like a hand that wasn't heavy, and I said, "I wanted you to see the dates." And he nodded like he was memorizing each one to tell them to himself later in the recliner. "Drive safe," he said, and I said I would, and as I stepped toward the door, Mom moved into my path like she owned the fire code and hissed, "You will never be as good as your sister at keeping a family together." And I smelled lemon cleaner on her and the faint sharp bite of the cheap champagne they were handing out, and I said, "I'm not trying to keep anything together that needs the truth taped over to stay in one piece." And then I opened the door and felt the cool air slap my face like a permission slip that didn't need a second signature. The hour after I left felt like when you've been in a room that's too loud and you step outside and realize your ears have been working twice as hard as usual. So I drove toward home with the radio off and the windows cracked. And when I hit the stoplight by the grocery store, I could hear the clatter of carts and smell fried chicken from the deli, and it made me want something ordinary more than it made me hungry. I pulled into my spot and sat there long enough to watch a neighbor struggle with a case of water, and when I went inside the apartment it felt a little bigger than it had that morning just because my shoulders weren't up around my ears anymore. I made a grilled cheese the way my grandmother taught me, low heat so it browns without burning, and I ate half of it standing up and half of it sitting down because I could not decide whether a chair would feel like an accomplishment or a trap. My phone buzzed with 2 texts from numbers that had been friendly a year ago and now read like the edges of a crowd at a parade you don't want to watch. "Uncalled for," one said. "We didn't need the whole scene," said the other. I set the phone face down on the counter, rinsed my plate, and decided that if I needed a soundtrack it would be the kind that didn't ask me to clap on the beat. The late game was just starting, and I let the announcer's low voice fill the edges of the quiet like a nightlight. Sunday morning after the party, the gossip had already run its course through the neighborhood like it had a race bib. Because my mailbox had a smear of black paint where someone had rubbed their sleeve against it, and my welcome mat was crooked like a foot had slipped while someone read a text. I made coffee in the chipped mug I like and sat at the small table by the window with my notebook open to the page where I'd written, "I am done shrinking," and I put today's date under it and wrote, "That was the closest I've ever come to not shaking when I told the truth." The air felt cooler when I cracked the window, and I could hear a couple arguing 2 parking spaces over about whether the tailgate cooler was in the shed, and the normalness of it made my stomach unclench just enough to eat a banana. Around noon Dad texted me a photo of his hand holding the timeline I'd given him, and under it he wrote, "Talked to a guy about the deed." And my throat went tight because he'd used period-free plain English and not a metaphor to tell me he had done a thing with his own name on it. I asked if he was okay, and he sent back, "I will be," and followed with a note that said he was going to step away from the LLC and meet someone at a different office, and under that he added, "I'll keep you out of it," which was both a kindness and a promise I'd take. Monday's local news talked for 5 minutes about a zoning fight on the west side and 30 seconds about a statewide review of notary practices after a series of irregularities, which was a nothing burger to most people and the only thing that felt like a wind at my back to me, and right after the anchor smiled into the camera about cooler temperatures moving in. The email arrived from Buckeye Title with a subject line so polite it felt pointed, "File closure notification," and inside it said, "Due to unresolved verification issues related to the attempted credit line and unrelated deed concerns, we are closing the file at this time. You may reopen in 90 days with complete documentation." I read the sentence twice, then a third time, because fighting words are usually louder and this was almost quiet, and I exhaled in a way that felt like a small balloon letting out air you didn't know you'd been holding for 18 days. 10 minutes later, Lindsay called, and I let it ring once and answered, because I was not going to hide in a corner of my own life. "You ruined my closing," she said without hello, and the sound of her crying filled the space between us in a way that made me want to hand her a glass of water and also shake her shoulders, and I said, "They closed it themselves," and she said, "Because of you," and I said, "Because of the documents," and we went back and forth like that long enough that my coffee went cold. She switched to soft, then to sharp, then back to soft, like she was scrolling through all the presets, and then she said something that hurt more than anything else that month. "Mom said you've always been jealous because you didn't get the good pieces," she said, and I felt my chest go tight and my eyes sting, not because she was right, but because sometimes a lie told often enough can sound true even in your own mouth if you're not careful. "I want my own pieces," I said. "That's all. I want the ones with my name on them." She sniffed and said, "We needed help for 1 month," and I said, "You asked for the breathing room that belongs to my lungs," and there was a long beat where we both breathed and didn't know what to do with the air. "I hope you find a path," I said finally, and I meant it in a way that surprised me, and she hung up without telling me whether she'd heard the difference between hope and help. On Tuesday, the last one before rent was due, my branch manager stopped by my desk with a small plant someone had left in the break room with a note that said "Free to a good home," and he put it down like a peace offering and said, "Your mother left another message." And I felt my stomach brace for a punch, and then he said, I deleted it, and followed with, "Carla's handling any calls from family," and he added, "I know you know this, but you work here, you don't have to solve here," and it landed the way practical kindness does, not like a hug, just like someone had set down a bag they didn't need you to carry. I watered the plant with what was left of my water bottle and watched the soil darken, and I reminded myself that my life is not a series of emergencies, even if this month had felt like a test of that theory. Wednesday evening, I drove to my parents' cul-de-sac because Dad had asked me to stop by after 6, before 8, which is how he sets appointments when he's feeling brave. And I parked at the curb again and walked past the yard that always smells like fertilizer and the house with the Halloween inflatables already struggling against the wind. The front door was open to the screen like always, and Dad was sitting at the dining table with the good pens out as if he was filling out a school form, and he had a yellow pad with 3 lines written on it in block letters, "Attorney appointment set." Request for deed review filed, and POA destroyed, and he looked up at me like he wanted to make sure I understood what those bullets meant before he said them out loud. Mom was not in the room, which made the silence feel fair for the first time in a while. "I should have paid closer attention," he said, and his voice didn't carry any excuse on it, and I said, "We were all doing what we knew," and then I added, "Thank you," because he had done a thing that cost him comfort to give me air. He slid an envelope across the table. "Your grandmother's last note," he said. I made a copy. "She didn't say what your mother says," she said. "She wrote that she hoped fairness would feel like love when we were gone." That's it. I read the sentence twice and felt a heat build behind my eyes that I didn't fight, and he watched the water gather and didn't look away because maybe we were both done pretending to be people who never cried at a table. Mom came in from the garage like a storm front and said, "We're not rewriting history," and Dad stood up, which he doesn't do when she starts, and said, "We're writing it down," and he gestured to the yellow pad. And she made a sound that meant we were all going to pay for this with extra chores until we died, and I picked up my envelope and put it in my tote and said, "I'll be going," and she said, "Of course you will." And I didn't explain that leaving was the only way I could stand to come back sometime later with my shoulders not clenched into my ears. Thursday brought a letter from the Notary Commission that said they had accepted Heather's statement and would be issuing a reprimand and a short suspension, and it didn't make me happy exactly, but it did hit the part of my brain that likes a scoreboard. And in the evening, I walked the 2 miles around my complex and listened to the sound of my shoes on the pavement and the rattling of the maple leaves, and I felt almost human for stretches that had nothing to do with anyone else's paperwork. On the way back, I passed a handmade sign for a Saturday morning moving sale, and the arrow pointed toward a row of townhouses that look like mine. And it reminded me of the garage sale earlier in the month when Mrs. Alvarez had told me that we make money about love to avoid doing the math. And I thought about how I had spent 3 weeks doing math with my name on it, and how it was the most loving thing I had done for myself since I learned how to make grilled cheese without burning the edges. On the last Saturday of the month, the day that would have been closing day, I woke up before the sun because my body had gotten used to counting, and I made coffee and watched a local morning show where a cheerful man taught people how to winterize their hose bibs. And then I drove to the moving sale with $15 in my pocket and came back with a small side table and a lamp with a shade that made my living room look like I'd intended it this way all along. In the afternoon, I got a text from Lindsay that said, "We're looking at a lease on a 2-bedroom 10 miles out, month to month while we figure things out," and it had a photo of a carpet the color of oatmeal and a window that faced a parking lot. And there was no emoji, and I read it 3 times, and then I wrote back, I hope it's quiet and you get good light, and she didn't reply, but I felt something loosen in my chest, not forgiveness, but something like a door opening to fresh air. That evening, Dad sent a photo of a baseball cap on the coffee table and a glass of iced tea beside it and wrote, "Come by for a game soon," and I said, "I will." And I meant it even though I knew it might be quiet when I did, and that we might watch 7 innings without touching anything hard on purpose. Sunday night, I sat at the small table with the lamp on and the side table holding a stack of bills and my notebook, and I flipped back to the first page of the month and read the notes I had scribbled too fast, and then I wrote a last line across the bottom. "I didn't win," I wrote. I just stood up, and when I read it out loud, it sounded like a person who had finally learned her own height. Mom hadn't called since Wednesday, which was its own weather pattern, and the absence of her voice in my ear made the apartment feel like it had a new wall where a draft used to come in. I caught my reflection in the window and noticed my shoulders weren't up and my mouth wasn't tight, and I could hear a neighbor's TV with the late game when someone hit a clean double to the gap. And the announcer said something about staying within yourself and taking the pitch you're given, and I smiled because coaches say that, but sometimes daughters have to teach it to themselves. Monday morning, which rolled the month into its last thin slice, I stopped at the credit union early and put a freeze on my credit because a woman can be calm and still be practical, and when I came out, the air had that look that promises a real fall. The kind that asks you for a sweater and gives you permission to walk a mile just to hear your footsteps. I parked beside my building and saw that someone had nudged my mailbox back into perfect alignment and wiped the smear of paint off the side, and when I looked closer I could see a smudge where a hand had steadied itself on the post. It might have been a neighbor who got annoyed by crooked things. It might have been Dad making a small tour of repairs. It might have been no one I know. But I touched the wood anyway just to feel something sturdy under my fingers. I unlocked my door, put my tote on the chair, and stood in the quiet of my own space and said my name out loud once, not a shout, not a whisper, just my name like a statement of fact, and I heard how it sounded when it belonged to me and not to anyone else's plans. And the room held it like a thing worth keeping. In the weeks that followed, I'm sure there were versions of the story that did not match my folder, and that's not my business anymore because family runs on versions, and I can't edit them all. What I can do is keep a clean file, pay my own bills with my own money, carry a plant into work that I didn't ask for but like anyway, eat grilled cheese on days I need a win that no one else can take credit for, and answer my father's texts when he says the game is on and he has enough tea for 2. When Mom's name shows up on my phone, I let it ring when I'm not ready and I answer when I am, and I keep the conversation short enough to leave room for the part of my life that doesn't have to be defended. Lindsay's lease will end and she'll decide what comes next, and I will not sign for any of it, and that boundary is not a punishment or a new family rule. It's just the shape of my life drawn in pen, not pencil, because smudges are how we got here. I'm not trying to be as good as my sister. I am trying to be as good as I can be at being me, and that's not a slogan. It's a list of small acts done on regular days, like writing down dates, like holding paper steady, like saying no without shaking, like leaving a room without explaining the whole time you were there. If there's a price, I'm paying it, but at least the receipt has my name spelled right, and if that sounds like a cheap TV series line, I know, but life doesn't ask for my notes before it airs. I put the folder back on the shelf where the tax returns live. I put the plant near the window so it can get enough light. I lock my door with the simple twist I've done 1,000 times. And I lie down on the couch with the game low and my feet under a blanket that sheds everywhere, and the good news is that my heart rate doesn't spike when the phone buzzes. And the better news is that I don't have to check it right away to make sure my name is still where I left it. On the last night of the month, the air finally cooled enough that my father cracked the living room window and the sounds of the block drifted in, carts wobbling against the curb from someone's late grocery run, and a dog barking 2 houses down. And we watched the game with the volume low while a store-brand pie sat sweating on the counter because he thought dessert might make a hard month go down easier. During the 7th inning stretch, he cleared his throat the way he does before he says something he can't fix with a trip to the hardware store and said, "You carried your own weight," and I felt the words land in my chest like a steadying hand. And I said, "I carried my name," and he nodded with the quiet of a person who has decided that counts. And after the last out, he wrapped the leftover pie in foil and tucked it into a bag like he was sending me home from a school lunch. In the car, a text from Lindsay pinged, no hearts, no digs, just a photo of a small living room with 2 windows and a caption that read, "We move Saturday. Carpet's ugly, but it's quiet." And I typed back, "Quiet is worth more than people think," and put the phone face down without waiting to see if the dots appeared. When I got to my apartment, I set the pie on the counter, pulled the clear folder from my tote, and slid a fresh sheet on top. A single line that said, "No signatures pending," then wrote my name in block letters at the top, like a label on a box I wasn't planning to loan out. And as I was turning off the kitchen light, the phone buzzed one more time, and it was Mom with a message that read, "Return the cake server when you remember, nothing else." And I stood there with my hand on the switch and let the smallness of it move past me without stopping. Then I locked the door, folded the blanket over the arm of the couch, and lay down with the game recap murmuring through the wall from the neighbor's TV. My shoulders not pulled up around my ears for the first time all month, and I fell asleep without rehearsing anyone else's lines.